Hafsa, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we're during Ramadan and you're fasting, so I doubly appreciate you doing this at this time.
No, of course, we're supposed to live life as as normal during Ramadan.
Yes, but sometimes it's a challenge, so thank you. So you have, I think, a very interesting take on two of the bigger issues, especially in this part of the world: feminism and your religion, and you're a Muslim. How is it that you came to this understanding that there is the need to have conversations, but also maybe not everybody is aligned as you think we should be?
Well, the word feminism is, I mean, I also kind of distanced myself from that term for a while because there's a lot of controversy with that word in Muslim communities. It's seen as this Western concept that's trying to liberate Muslim women outside of the context of faith. But when I started reading texts by Muslim female scholars about Islam and gender, and about how feminism was ingrained in the early messages of Islam, uh, it really became clear that feminism is part of the faith, and it was part of those the emancipatory messages and revelations. Um, just the word feminism maybe irks some people because it's seen to be this Toronto protests or, things of, undressed women, and when you pair that with the modesty in Islam, it seems to be contradictory.
Do you receive any pushback from conservative elements within the religion?
Um, I did a little bit, but I'm quite careful now about who I share my beliefs with. I think there was a scholar, her name's Sadia Sheikh, and in one of the, book club, discussions that I was in with Dr. Sophia Rahman's book club, one of us asked, I can't remember if it was me or her, but me or somebody else, but somebody asked, how do we take this beautiful movement and take it outside of these little niche areas, and how do we convince others that Islam is feminist and it's beautiful and there's room for everything? And I think she kind of said, "It's okay if it doesn't leave your circles. You can make your little circles elsewhere. It's okay if we're not shouting about it in the mainstream because change happens slowly and happens in these kind of smaller community-led circles." So that's kind of helped me realize that you don't need to change everybody's mind. You can't change everybody's mind, but you can practice it. You can practice your faith the way you believe, um, to the best of your ability in your circle, in your family, with your friends, with your safe space.
I understand that, and I agree with that. And I am a big proponent of the baby step approach to many things. But do you, how do you, okay, let me ask you this. If you were to be in a situation where you could speak to more conservative elements, men and women, how would you describe to them the best way for them to be comfortable with the, maybe not the naming, but with the ideals of feminism within the confines or within the freedoms of Islam?
I think for Islamic conversations, always have to go back to the Quran. So I would advise everybody to read the Quran again with an open mind and try and let go of interpretations and cultural baggage we often bring to it, and that historically interpreters have often brought to it as well, and read it in that kind of new understanding and see that the principles are quite aligned with gender equality. And we often say that, okay, no, women and men aren't the same, but they're equal. They don't have to be the same, but they can still be equal. And especially spiritually, they're equal. We're not biologically the same, but in the eyes of God, we're equal.
Do you think that part of the issue that you might deal with is not that the conservative elements within Islam have a problem with anything you're saying, but they might get stuck on the word feminism?
Yes, I think the word feminism has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because of the way it's been marketed as like white feminism, Western savior feminism, especially around the war against terror. This idea that like we have to liberate Afghan women from their burqas, that was all a feminist narrative,
Mhm.
and that's why there is skepticism from Muslim communities against feminism. There's actually a new book that comes out in March. It's called The Othered Woman: How White Feminism Harms Muslim Women. And it's by a Muslim journalist, Shahid Zaidi. It's being published in the UK first, but then globally. And she really analyzes this so well. She talks about how growing up in a Muslim household and then going to school in the UK, she was being taught a certain kind of feminism in school, and then at home she was learning a different kind of feminism from a faith-based perspective. The two weren't aligning in any way. Nobody really
Yeah.
understood both, and she has written a whole book about it, and it's really insightful.
Yeah, I think that especially in the Gulf in particular, um, I feel that there is this, not with religion, but I feel that there's this West is best mentality that exists still. And conversely, I also think that there's going to be criticism about any issues that maybe people feel they've been imported from the West, right? So feminism. I think that the easier way would be to talk about being a modern Muslim woman. But then there might be some who would say, no, actually, this is the way that it's been for, hundreds of years, and there shouldn't necessarily be a take that it has to be modern. Do you agree with that?
I think the time that we're in, it always shapes everything. It shapes societal interactions. It shapes um, how we practice our faith. And so the time, like whether it's modernity or like ancient times, has always played a role in how we perceive things like gender relations.
So we've talked about this a little bit before we were on camera. You've had your children in Canada. You went to school in Canada. You've also gone to school in London. You've got an American passport. You've lived here for many years. Coming back, I guess being in the West and then coming back here, being in a Muslim country, do you have a different relationship with Islam because it's here as opposed to, say, being, and you and I both went to the same university in Canada, as opposed to being back in Canada?
Not really. I mean, you could say that outwardly, Islam is more accessible here in terms of there's a mosque at every neighborhood corner.
Sure.
Um, but I think one thing about being a Muslim in the West, those faith communities become very tight knit and very strong, um, at least in the cities where I lived in. So there was always, it was always there. I never felt a lack of support in terms of faith community or lack of access. There were mosques and other groups, and in a way, there was more variety there. Whereas in the Gulf, it may be one one type, one interpretation of faith, one vision of orthodoxy. Whereas in the West, more there's more diversity.
I also think that, the Gulf compared to, say, the Levant during Ramadan, now the way Ramadan happens in Dubai is more consistent with other parts of the Levant because you would have Druze and you would have Christians and you would have Muslims, and not everything would close. And certainly when I first came here, and I know for you as well, back in the day, the weekends were Thursday, Friday, right? And then during Ramadan, pretty much everything shut down. Now, it I don't know if it's well, I've never done it. I'm not a Muslim, so I'd ask you, do you find it more of a challenge being in a city where everything is open and people are eating and drinking during Ramadan?
I personally don't find it more of a challenge. I have no issue with it, but for sure, it has changed drastically over the past decade, 2 decades. I remember, yeah, you would get, like, tickets if you were eating or drinking in public, and, yeah, it's definitely more open now. Even, before women would wear an abaya, maybe some from the gym to the car even, they would make sure to cover up, if they were especially during Ramadan, but now there's nobody really does that anymore either.
Yeah. I I was I spent 4 years in Doha, and then I came back, and I was speaking to a Canadian who I had worked with in Doha and was also working in Dubai. And we were having a conversation during Ramadan over coffee. And it was before iftar. And we were both, as two white Canadians, drinking coffee during Ramadan, talking about how we missed a little bit of the more traditional elements to Ramadan. And again, this is me as a Canadian, sort of wondering if maybe some of that. Do you find that I think you have to look for it a little bit more now
Yeah.
here. Do you feel that way as
Yeah,
well?
and I do miss it as well.
Yeah.
I do miss it as well. It's part of the charm, um, of living here. I do miss that. Uh, Even at iftar time, if you were at a suhoor or if at a iftar, if you were at a restaurant, anywhere, they would play the azan, the prayer call, and that doesn't really happen everywhere anymore. You kind of have to be looking at your phone to check, "Is it time now? Can I break my fast?"
Right.
Which, which is a big change. Like previously, I think all the malls still play it at
Yeah, I
iftar
think
time,
so.
but there are some hotels and restaurants that don't play it anymore. And yeah, the big difference from like, I remember when we first moved here, you would be scared to drink water in your car
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
with the windows up, like
Yes, I was
yeah,
just gonna say if your tinting wasn't strong enough, right?
yeah.
So, you've written about how, when you were younger, you were a big fan of rap music, Eminem in particular, and, you have children now yourself. They're when they become teenagers, and they're going to either rebel or they're gonna be interested in pop culture or whatever it is. How are you gonna have that conversation with them? Because I would imagine you'd wanna talk a little bit about your experiences, where you want to educate them, you want to let them know right from wrong, but you also want to, I would assume, give them the freedom to sort of make some of their own choices. How will you bring up some of the challenges that you look back upon and think maybe that wasn't necessarily the right move at that time?
Well, I'm still dealing with how to explain to my 7-year-old about crushes. So this is um, I think they'll have that maturity when in their teens. Hopefully, that we'll be able to have an open conversation, and I really want to have that as a parent, open conversations with my kids as they grow up. I think it's really important to establish trust and also just understanding and have that familiarity, not that fear. So, yeah, they'll have the freedom and flexibility to make their own choices, mistakes, just like we all did. Um, if I start thinking about how I'll have that conversation, I'm going to get very stressed.
So, well, I was raised a Catholic, and I think some of the best religions, and I think Islam, falls into this category, is that you're you're encouraged to question, to ask, to delve, to research. And I know that in my family, I had a couple of great uncles who were both Jesuits, and some of the best discussions would be when you were not questioning your faith, but you were asking why questions. And I think that when parents end up having those conversations with their children, um, I think the children start to appreciate the authenticity and the vulnerableness that is associated with the parent saying, I don't know. That's kind of
Yeah.
stuff that we can help you with, but you're going to have to find some of those answers on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had little versions of that, and
Sure.
and I really enjoy those moments. I think my daughter asked a few weeks ago, "What does God look like?" Or "What do you picture when you picture God?" And so we all kind of went around and said what we picture, and
Right.
it was interesting to hear what she thought. And like she's imagining like an old lady, and I'm imagining a ball of light, and I think it's very important to have that openness.
So, when you think about, uh, say, Western feminism, as opposed to maybe the feminism that you're comfortable with in Islam, what do you think that, because we touched upon this earlier, what do you think that Western feminism gets wrong about the idea that um, women who are Muslim are not as free as the West would make you think?
Mm. I think Western feminism doesn't understand that for Muslim women, we often center our faith. So we draw everything from our faith. We draw, um, our feminism from our faith. So whereas Western feminism is maybe more concerned about just being on this equal footing with men, always being on equal footing with men in career and family, always. And oftentimes in Muslim families and frameworks, there is definitely the equal respect and equal understanding between the genders. They just don't always look the same. Often, traditionally, the man is the breadwinner, the woman is the caretaker. Not always, but women find comfort and stability and happiness, a lot of women, in those roles. And Western feminism kind of seeks to break those roles down sometimes. Um, those roles, again, this is not like a monolithic.
Mhm.
I'm also a breadwinner. I also my husband's a very active parent, so it's we also don't fall into that traditional culturally inherited stereotype of a Muslim family or South Asian family. But I think that's one thing that Western feminism overlooks.
Yeah, I also think that right now and it has happened for the last couple of years, there's conversations that are taking place now in the West, where people are wanting more traditional roles. And that doesn't mean that, in an Islam household, as you said, everybody's falling into traditional roles. That's not the case. But there is, I think, with a lot of young men and women who are struggling to find a little bit of comfort in structure. And I think feminism with Gloria Steinem in the 60s would have been very much, well, you're a woman, I'm a man, anything I can do, you can do as well. And I believe that by nature, I don't think I'm conservative, but men and women are different. We think differently. We see things through a different lens. And I think what we want in life is also sometimes very different. So when you're in your book clubs and you're having some of these conversations with some of the other women, without giving names away, but what are some of the challenges that they're facing, you know?
So one of the topics that often comes up is inheritance and how in traditional Islamic legal thought, a woman gets half the amount of inheritance as her brother. Um, but if you look at the books that we read often look at the historical context of those verses. At that time, the males were the primary breadwinners. They were responsible for supporting their family, their women, whereas the women were not earning money or definitely not as much money. And in the modern day context, we have two income families where sometimes a wife might even be the primary breadwinner. So for her to get less inheritance doesn't really make sense. So there are a lot of ways in which modern Muslims are looking to um, work around these traditional parameters and also seek solutions that suit the needs of today.
How did it come about? Was it just a kernel of an idea and that grew over the course of weeks or months? Or was it something that sort of where right away you saw this idea for a book bringing together these two, philosophies and beliefs?
So after my first book, my nonfiction book, Modesty, a Fashion Paradox, came out in 2020, I kind of felt like I want to write a novel next, but I didn't know what I'd write about. I knew the main character would be a modern Muslim woman struggling with aspects of faith and identity, but I didn't really have a plot or any idea of how I'd go about it. So I kind of shelved it for a bit. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I saw this news story about a woman who went into labor and gave birth on a plane from the UAE to Nigeria. And when I got pregnant a few months later, and I knew I would be traveling to Canada on a 14-hour flight to give birth in 34 weeks, in my 34th week of pregnancy, that story just kind of came back and kind of it was very jarring. And the fear or the fear of potentially going to labor on a plane stayed with me. And I thought this would make a really good novel
Mhm.
idea. This could be kind of the big
Point of tension.
point of tension, exactly. And then I kind of worked from there and worked backwards. So then I built this character and showed how she grew up and um, how she gets married and then becomes a mother and all of these how her sacrifices start breaking away at her identity and her sense of identity. So I kind of it's set in different places. She's raised in London, she studies in New York, and then she moves to the Gulf, an unnamed city in the Gulf. It could be anywhere. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Everything else was fictionalized. I mean, even the everything was fictionalized, but it was a lot of fun to kind of put some of the thoughts and the doubts and the insecurities that women of my generation often have into this character. Her name's Dunya.
So, in the feedback that you've received, not the professional, but I'm talking like the anecdotal stuff, either friends or friends of friends or people reaching out to you on social media. Um, Not looking for good or bad comments, but I'm looking for when people reach out to you, is it you finally have created, a character that I can relate to, or is it something that's I wouldn't even understand?
Yeah, it's exactly that. The relatability has been the and that's the best feedback that I could have hoped for. And it's these anecdotal, normal readers' feedback, which is what matters most to me because I wanted to write a Muslim woman who I never read about growing up and who I haven't really read about in the last 10 years, who's not perfect. She's not this like picture perfect, pious Muslim woman. She's not a rebel either. She's somewhere in the middle. Her faith fluctuates. She has questions. Um, she expresses her doubts and insecurities. So that's why I made it first person so that we could really get into her head. And yeah, that's been a lot of the feedback has been, "This could be a girl we know. This could
Mhm.
be one of our friends." And this is so relatable. And a lot of the women in the Gulf in particular have resonated with the expat nature of the character. And also, yeah, that tension between faith and culture and personal career ambitions and being a mother. So yeah, it's been more than I could hope for.
Yeah, and I would think that for you, becoming a mother, did it make you realize that I guess it did. It made you realize that faith is more important than you thought it was to you? Is that how it sort of worked for you?
No, I think even before I knew faith was important, but I maybe became more aware of how I practiced my faith and the kind of example I'm setting.
Right. And then, your husband, I'm curious, does he struggle at all with your, feminist ideals and trying to find, that path that works for you, or he's there, you
No,
do you?
he's completely supportive. We're on the same page. It's been a blessing.
And, no pushback from other family members with the book saying, "I can see part of you in this character, and is this actually how you feel?"
No, my family's also very open-minded and supportive and um yeah, not at all.
And do you think that over the course of time as Dubai grows, um, because of course Emirates Literature Festival is such a big deal, and more books are set here. Do you think that there's going to be, from a literary point of view, more protagonists who are women and who are Muslim and who are very comfortable, speaking about the importance of their faith?
I think so, and I hope so. And I see this abroad. There are authors who are there's Tasneem Abdul Rashid. She's a YA author, and she wrote a book called Odd Girl Out. It's about a girl who's raised in Dubai, and then her parents get divorced, and she has to move back to the UK, and she doesn't know how to make her bed, or let alone make her breakfast. So it's this big shock. It was so enjoyable to read, especially that being a YA book. I think we don't have enough of this in young adult. So I think it's maybe even more important to have this in the realm of young adult, these complex, layered, messy
Yeah,
Muslim characters. And there are quite a few authors who are I don't want to say rocking the boat, but
sure.
who are yeah maybe rocking the boat in literature. They're not
Right.
writing those stereotypical uh, Muslim female character tropes. They're exploring the gray areas, and everything's not black and white.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at it that we're human, which means that we're not perfect, which means that we're going to grow and evolve. And the way I am when I got married, say at 24, is not the way I am when I was 44 or 54, right? And so we've become a little bit messy. And I think that the messiness is helpful and instructive to other people, right? And I would imagine messiness also makes for good fodder for writing
For
characters.
sure. Yeah, messiness is was the goal with this character to make her uh, and and also messy at certain points of in her life and super put together at other points of her life. Very confident in her faith sometimes, and then um, kind of losing her faith at other
Right.
times, which we all go through, doubting her faith at other times. So it was important for me to have those highs and lows.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you want to capture honesty and authenticity, right? And I think that that's, certainly authenticity is something that resonates on social media, and I think it's something that resonates, in novels as well. So, um, last question, what's next from a literary point of view? You have another book in you? Are you gonna go down that road?
I would love to. Uh, I didn't have 2 children when I wrote this one, but I would love to. I really particularly loved writing fiction. I loved how your imagination gets stretched and you can kind of weave in this social commentary and elements of real life into this um, fictional story that you make up. So I really enjoyed it. I'd love to do more of it. Let's see.
Okay, so I said that was the last question. I'm gonna ask another one. When you write, so I'll listen and watch, and read about authors who are active today. And these are men and women who usually will produce, say, a book a year. And their approach is, they're up every morning, they're at their computer by 8 or 9, and they do that for 5 or 6 hours. And it's something that they do, that's part of the discipline. Is that your approach?
Oh god, 5 or 6 hours. No, I'm lucky if I get 2 hours. At the literature festival, at the Emirates Literature Festival, I was interviewing, Mira Sethi. She's a Pakistani actress and author, and her advice or her own, writing practice, she said she stays in her pajamas and she sits on the couch with the laptop on her lap to make it casual. She
Mm,
said, "If I wear proper clothes and sit at a desk, it suddenly there's pressure and it suddenly becomes like a formal
right.
practice." And she said if she keeps it casual, the words are able to just flow more seamlessly out. So I'm working on that approach right now.
I had a friend in Doha, actually a Canadian friend, who also went to Ryerson, and her approach was, her motto was 150 words, because it's so quick. If you can find the time to sit down to write 150 words in a very short period of time, that becomes 5 or 600,
Yeah.
and then you're probably in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
And 1,000, 2,000 words later, and it all started with
Yeah.
150 words.
My goal is 1,000 a day when I'm writing, but it's usually 5 to 700.
Are you a fast writer? I'm not a fast writer. Are you?
I am a fast writer when the creative juices are flowing.
Sure.
So yes, and I tend to overwrite, which is also a good thing, I think. From Turbulence, 20,000 words were cut from the first draft to the last draft. So I think that's okay. At first, I kind of wasn't very happy with that loss, but I think that's needed when I write. I need to overwrite and then edit it down.
So that also brings up another question. How many drafts did it take?
Many, I stopped counting after I think 20. But for me, I considered each time I printed out, like even if it's just chapters 1 to 10, that was a draft for
Sure.
me. So many. It was a 4-year process. So
Wow.
lots of
And you
um
want to embark on that again?
I would be quicker this time.
So what, 3 years?
I within 1 year, I would hope. Yeah.
Really?
I mean, the first draft was 1 year for both books, 9 months-ish. The time they were both during my pregnancies, and I kind of cut off
Right.
when the time the baby's due. That's the time the first draft has to be due. So
So does that mean you're going to have a
no,
third
I'm
child?
not. That's what everyone's saying. So now you have a third book. No,
Yeah.
hopefully now my books are my babies too.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate
Thank you
this.
so much. Thank you for having me.